All right, welcome to lesson number 6 with VP Culture. And this is the Culture Science unit where we're trying to get everyone to build cultures based on valuing people. So this lesson specifically is going to be culture is hard work. So this is one of the key elements. What I want you to do is be able to succeed in building your culture. And one of the success methodologies is knowing what you're getting into. You're looking at 3 to 5 years of hard work to get this all done and solid. But initially, there's going to be a curve that we're going to look at that throws a lot of companies off their change efforts, not only change efforts to change their culture, but change efforts to change just about anything in your organization. So let's dive into these secrets and see what's going on. All right. So what we're looking at is 70% of change efforts fail, unfortunately, according to McKinsey research. But we want you to be in this 30% category. So pay close attention to the differentiators that make this 30% category the winners in the change efforts. These principles are going to be critical. So here are some of the 3 critical change effort elements that you need to have. The first one we've already been talking about, how VP culture changes your intrinsic motivations, how it changes people. So you're giving people a story about how life is going to be changed by this effort. So sometimes it could be a crisis, we're going to go out of business, but VP culture is its own built-in change story. And that's why we start there. It motivates all people, and it's a great way to start with a change story. So that's the first critical element in any great change effort that you need to have. And then you need focused time. What we find is that people over time need 10 times more communication than most executives think they need. So you have to communicate again and again and again and again. You have to focus the minds of the people in your teams on these efforts. A one-time all-hands meeting and with a lot of rah-rah is not going to make a change effort, nor sending out an email once a month is not going to make a change effort. You need to have at least weekly focused time that you're dedicating to whatever change effort you're doing. So those are 2 critical elements that you need to have. And this third one is pretty curious. It's called the capabilities trap. And when I was studying at MIT, this was one of the most critical elements that they brought out again and again that you have to watch out for this capabilities trap. And this was brought up by 2 researchers called Reppening and Sturman. And they were they wrote a seminal paper about this that exposed how company after company gets stuck in the capabilities trap and can't get their way through to the other side. It's a place in your change efforts where your change efforts stall and people don't realize that it's stalled and they can't get through the capabilities trap. So what is the capabilities trap going to lead us to? What is it exactly? Well, it looks like this. Most people, when they need to change, something's going wrong. That change effort, that change story has kicked in. And so what do? They work harder. They work faster. They put in more effort. So this line represents effort and performance. So usually you throw everybody at the problem and they're still vigorous and they start to perform and performance goes up because everyone's working harder, right? But over time, what happens? It goes down and down and down and down and down. And not only because they're getting tired, but because you're just using this one methodology of throwing more work at a situation. You're not innovating, learning, and overcoming the problem. You're not changing. You're just doing the same thing with more effort. Okay, so performance takes a big bump and then it goes down. That's one critical thing. But this is what you're doing long term. You're using this overtime strategy. You're spending late nights working on the piles of work that has piled up, and you're spending less and less time on improvement and maintenance of what should be happening. You're not having those team meetings. We don't have time for the team meetings. We don't have time for this change effort. We got too much to do. So you end up spending more time on working harder overtime and less and less and less time on improvement. Okay? So what's the next thing that goes down? As we mentioned earlier, your capabilities eventually start to drop and go down. Meaning, if you're not spending that time on improvement, you're going to plateau at first, and then new software is going to come out. New techniques are going to come out. The market is going to shift. And your capability is going to go down while everyone's working harder to try to keep up with the same amount of material. It's like your boat is springing leaks and you're sending more people down in the boat to keep bailing the water out. Well, sure, the boat's still going forward, but you've got 10 people down in the hole bailing the water out all the time, and then you got to send one of your other top workers down there to go bail out the water rather than pulling into the port, fixing the problem, doing change efforts, improving things. So what does it look like to take the alternative strategy? Instead of working harder, let's start working smarter. So here is the capabilities trap. So we're going to try to do this change effort. We're going to try to do VP culture. We're going to say, hey, everybody, we're going to do VP culture. And here's what the trap is. Instead of that spike in performance that the work harder method has, this is the work different. And suddenly everyone's feeling cognitive dissonance and they can't get past this. They get stuck down in this little trough. And this is where we want you not to get stuck. We want you to get past this trough and get people up into this higher performance ratio over time, okay? So that's the important step, is getting past this particular little blip in the performance chart. And if you can do this over time, what happens is, the positive thing is you're going to spend more time on improvement because you're going to create a learning type culture that can learn, develop, iterate, improve. And each step of improvement saves them time and effort. So they're going to be spending less on the overtime thing, less working harder and more working smarter, because you're spending more time and becoming this virtuous circle of improvement. Just as we were talking about how serotonin and valuing people creates a virtuous circle of improvement and engagement with people, so too this system, when you engage it and get past this little curve in the beginning, you'll start to improve more and more over time. And you'll also see your capabilities continue to increase. So you'll be developing a culture that is a continuous improvement culture that will continue to improve over time. So can you see where this trap is happening here? It's happening right here. You see, look, we're doing better. And so everyone says, this work harder thing is working better. But they don't notice the gradual, over time, depreciation of their performance. And that's the significant problem. If you don't notice that this starts to turn down after you've hit that excited energy point, and if you don't notice that this curve here at the bottom is a dip, and this is where people bail out of the system, like, oh, I told you this wasn't going to work. Look, we're all working slower. Look, this is all harder. And they start going back to their shortcuts. Let's just work harder using the old method. And this is where you get a lot of that confirmation bias of people going, yeah, I told you, change never works. Change isn't worth it. It just is harder. It's because you're here and people can't see the big picture. So you as a leader and you as a team need to really realize that this is coming. That when you start doing these VP culture things, you're not going to see miraculous overnight achievements. You say, why are we spending time on these meetings? We should be bailing out the ship down in the bilge instead of in the port, fixing the ship so it'll run even faster. We're putting new sails on so it goes faster. Okay, so that's the key point. Now we're going to look at some of the science behind this. All right. So there are 3 biases. We call them heuristics. Our brains don't work like big mathematical machines calculating, okay, I can see how this curve will get better. No, we're very short-term focused in our minds because that's the way our minds were meant to work. Short-term focused, make a quick decision, and work on that. So we have this overconfidence that what we've been doing works. I know what I'm doing, and it's going to work. So what has always been done, we're overconfident about that. So that's one bias that we have. The second is confirmation bias. See, I told you so. See, I told you so. Everything that I already believe is confirmed. Change efforts don't work. See, And once they get down in that little trough, they go, see, I told you so. We worked real hard and we didn't get any further. In fact, our productivity went down. Here's the numbers that show it. There's not enough patience in the long-term thinking of the mind to get past the confirmation bias. So you need to help people past these biases as leaders and as team members. Like, hang in there. Loss aversion. So once you find that you're starting to slow down, it's like, oh no, we're getting even further behind. Then this loss aversion, we better not invest anymore in this. Let's go back to what we know works. And people go back down in the hull of the ship and start bailing out that water that's leaking into the ship. And it's like, doesn't matter. It works. We know it works. So these are the 3 biases or heuristics that people use at that little bottom of the trough. And they get stuck there because of these short-term thinking mindsets. So I clue you into these so that scientifically you know how the fast mind works, and you need to activate the slower thinking mind and keep people focused on, hey, we're headed to the top of this mountain and we're gonna get there. Just hang in there and tell people ahead of time, we're gonna hit this trough and it's gonna feel nasty and your mind is gonna be screaming at you all these things. So hang in there, and we're going to start taking that ride up the mountain to greater productivity, greater innovation, and actually we're going to work smarter and less. So it'll be better over time. So you have to help people see their way through this. And we've got another little part of our brains that don't help us in this regard. And we'll talk a little bit about the basal ganglia in a couple of our lessons here, because the basal ganglia is the motor mechanism in our brain. It's this small part of our brain in our subcortical regions that causes habits and sort of like what we call procedural memory. So we default to no in this. So if we don't know how to do something, the brain is like, we don't do that. No, we're not going to do that. Things are shut off in the brain, like we don't do this, we don't do that, we don't do this. So change is by nature difficult for the brain. It takes weeks, months sometimes, years to really cement a new change into that procedural memory so that it becomes an on switch instead of an off switch. So the new software, the new ways of doing culture are going to be resisted by everyone's brain naturally. Okay, so this is something that we naturally do over time, and it takes us weeks to overcome because that's the nature of the brain. So when you know these things ahead of time, you know the science that your brain has got these fast-tuned ways of doing things called heuristics, biases, and you've got these default modes that are already set in your brain that's going to take a little bit to overcome. So that's the science behind this. Now let's talk about a story from DuPont. Now, back in 1991, DuPont was noticing that they weren't as competitive as they used to be. In fact, they noticed that there was about a 10 to 30% overage that they were paying for all of their maintenance costs. In fact, there was an average uptime of 10 to 15% lower than the overall industry. So what was causing this? This was probably something at the root cause of all the things that were happening in their factories and why. So they actually looked at this, and it went back all the way to the 1970s where there was an oil crisis, and because they worked with so many petrochemicals, when that price started to spike, they had to cut corners. And where else do you cut corners but maintenance? We got the machines, they're working right now, so let's cut those maintenance guys. Let's get rid of all those parts that we don't need sitting around the plants. So they cut their parts inventory. They cut their maintenance people. And so their machines by nature then were in their manufacturing plants were down more often. And when they needed a part, they didn't have it on hand. They had to rush order it in or have it manufactured custom by a machine shop quickly. So all of these things drove up that cost. And it was a cost-cutting measure that made sense at the time. Like, go down in the bilge, start bailing the ship out. And look, the ship is back to its normal speed. But soon they had to send more people down there. They had to pull more mechanics off the line that should have been working on other things and put them down on the maintenance issues. And then back and forth, it was just plummeting their productivity over time. So that was what DuPont came up with as the reason for their crisis. So you can see that work harder mentality at work here, where that like, hey, if we just work harder, and look at work. But over time, they didn't notice the slow downfall of their productivity and their output. That this work harder rather than smarter change effort hurt them over time. So over time, they had a guy named Winston Ledette, who was one of their experienced managers that they threw on the case, okay? And he was tasked with fixing the issue and realized that they were in a capabilities trap that we had just been talking about, okay? And they cut their short-term profits and they began to reorganize, okay? So when they reorganized, they put new people in maintenance, they restocked their parts, and they went through the change story. They did these simulations with their staff so that they could show the staff what was happening. So they would say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to simulate what happens when we go through the work harder blip, and then we lose productivity over time. And they were like, okay, we see that. And then they did the simulations where they did the capabilities trap of work smarter, and they saw, oh, look, we're going to have more investment. It's going to hurt. And we're going to have new people that we're going to have to train. And we're going to lose productivity for a while, but then we're going to gain and gain and gain, and we're going to become a more productive company. And sure enough, over time, they realized a 20% boost in overall productivity, and their runtime of equipment improved by 20%, and their customer service actually improved by 90% as well. So there was a lot of ancillary benefits because they can move their product, and delivery times were cut by 50%. So there were so many benefits to their partners that they were trying to fulfill their orders to, and they were able to successfully navigate this change effort. So this is a great story that gives you an idea how this functions within a large corporation, thinking about a change effort and how to avoid getting stuck in a change effort that has maybe some short-term benefits that blip up, but then the slow progression down to loss of capabilities and loss of productivity versus oh no, we're in the short term losing some productivity, in the short term losing some capabilities, but in the long term, we're gaining an organization that will over time be 20% more productivity and less turnover, happier people, happier customers, and it goes on and on. So this is something you'll be able to apply throughout your organization. Instead of saying we don't have time, we're too busy wasting time down in the bilge of our metaphorical ship, bailing out everything. What you want to do is you want to become a great leader who focuses energy on improving people, on valuing people. The more investment you make in there, we've talked about, is a 4-to-1 ratio, and of investment to outcomes being positive. So all of this is what we need to do. We need to start getting through this capabilities trap so you can get to the other side of building a valuable culture that will continue to improve over time. So what we're looking at now is some group discussion questions. So let's look at the first one. Discuss times that you experienced the capabilities trap. When in your life have you experienced something similar to this? Think about it. Might be in your personal life, might be in a corporate situation that you were in. So if anybody has a story who could think about a capability trap that you may have been in, let's talk about that now. All right, let's look at discussion question number 2. Discuss times that you overcame the capabilities traps and improved. When was a situation where it took you a little effort to learn a new skill, and then you were on your way to doing things better? You learned a new machine, you learned a new skill, and things got better. How did you do that on a team? Did you do that by yourself? Discuss this question with your team. All right, and the final question is, what does it feel like to master a new skill and to get better at your work? So do you ever do that personally? Do you ever do that within a corporate setting? Talk about that amongst your team, and then we'll move on to the final conclusion. So, culture is a little bit of hard work. You're going to have to get over that capabilities trap with a little bit of hard work and a little bit of reassurance and a great leadership. Your team is going to make it through this part of the culture change efforts, but you need to know it's not going to be a snap of the fingers. It's not going to be a walk in the park. So that's the main idea. So the capabilities trap exists, and now you know it's there. and you know how to avoid it. You need to avoid those 3 different heuristics that you can get trapped in. And then you need to help the brain over time work through its off switch and get your new habits going into the on zone. So that's the conclusion of lesson number 6, and we look forward to you in lesson number 7 coming up soon.